Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're coming to us from. Thank you so much for joining us for this event from the Center for Applied AI. My name is Emily Bembenek. I am the director of the center here at Chicago Booth, and I'm very thrilled to be hosting Generative AI in the Workplace for you all today with a slate of just fantastic speakers. If you don't know much about the center, we are a research center here at Chicago Booth at the University of Chicago. I have two amazing faculty directors, Sendel Mullin-Nathan, professor of computation and behavioral science, and Sanjog Misra, professor of marketing, both here at Chicago Booth. Our work focuses on looking at how AI impacts people, society, and markets. We think very deeply about how human intelligence and machine intelligence combined can lead to better decision-making and more equitable societal services for everyone. I'm going to introduce the speakers today. Before we get started, though, I just want to encourage you to enter any questions that you may have throughout the conversation into the Q&A tool that you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will be reserving time at the end of this session to go over audience questions. So please be liberal with your questions and just pepper us with them so that we have lots to talk about at the end of the session. So I'm going to start with our speakers and then introduce our moderator and hand it over to him to start the conversation and have a great discussion for you all today. First up, we have Larry Lerner, who is a partner at McKinsey, and he also leads generative AI and the analytics practices for McKinsey's banking services. I'm thrilled to have Larry here today. He is an alum of Chicago Booth, so welcome back. He advises financial institutions in his role at McKinsey on advanced analytics, data transformations, and scaling of digital and analytics capabilities, including, of course, artificial intelligence and generative AI specifically. He helps them develop strategies for risk and fraud analytics and achieve insight-driven product and customer growth. His recent work includes helping clients improve their advanced analytics programs, launch digital banks and data businesses, and create centralized analytics environments, taking advantage of this new landscape with generative AI tools and capabilities. So welcome, Larry. Looking forward to hearing from you today. Next up, we have Joselle Deocampo-Gautam. She is also an alum of Chicago Booth, so welcome back to you as well. Joselle is a business executive, tech leader, and leadership advisor with a track record of leadership in large-scale global operations. She has served at LinkedIn as operating leader and chief of staff for a $7 billion business unit. As a member of the engineering executive team, she transformed P&L management, investment allocation, and global operations, resulting in substantial growth and turnaround for LinkedIn Talent Solutions. She co-founded and expanded PwC's Global Financial Services Innovation Center across 4 continents and played a pivotal role in propelling digital transformation within PwC. She is the founder and CEO of On Point, a leadership advisory focused on leadership development. Her achievements have earned her recognition as a distinguished 40 under 40 professional and a woman of influence. Welcome, Joselle. We're excited to hear from you today as well. Our last panelist is going to be Elatia Abate. Super excited to welcome her to the event. Elatia is also an alum of Chicago Booth and of the college, so double Chicago whammy right there. Elatia is creator of The Future of Now. She's an entrepreneur whose mission is to revolutionize the way trailblazing leaders understand, train, and fuel their leadership. She's been named a Forbes leading female futurist and is a globally recognized expert on the futures of work and strategy, currently serving as Futurist-in-Residence for Paylocity, a billion-dollar HR tech firm. She developed future-led leadership, learning, and development content that's been utilized in organizations including Verizon, RMI, CME, GMAC, and the College of William and Mary Raymond A. Mason School of Business. She speaks on the topics of the future of work, leadership and resilience, and shares her message for audiences of thousands across some of the biggest firms in America and around the globe. She has a TEDx talk you can look up called Pioneering the Future of Work. Formerly, she was Global Director of Talent Acquisition at Anheuser-Busch InBev and VP of Human Resources at Dow Jones and Company. She has been featured in Fast Company, Esquire, Chief, Forbes, and has worked with Trevor Noah and Tony Robbins, She's just fantastic, and I'm very excited to have her here today. So welcome, Elatia. Looking forward to hearing from you. Our moderator today is Matt Notowidigdo, who is on the faculty here at Booth. Very excited to have you, Matt. Matt is the David McDaniel Keller Professor of Economics and Business and Public Policy Fellow at Booth, who studies a broad set of topics in labor economics and health economics. He's also one of the faculty directors of the Healthcare Initiative here at Chicago Booth, where they do some great work and research in healthcare analytics specifically. In labor economics, his research has focused on understanding the causes and consequences of long-term unemployment and the economic effects of unemployment insurance over the business cycle. In health economics specifically, Matt's focused on the effects of public health insurance on labor supply and the effects of income on health spending. He's currently working with many state governments on large-scale randomized experiments to understand existing social insurance programs. So welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for moderating for us today. I'm going to hand it off to you so that you can start this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, for all of those introductions. Welcome to our alumni and welcome to everybody participating in the panel today. So I wanted to start off maybe with just a little bit more introduction, in the sense I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. And to do that, I wanted to share a quick story about myself. I'm an economist. I do research in healthcare and labor markets, as Emily mentioned. But before that, I was actually a computer engineering student at MIT. 20 years ago, my then girlfriend, now wife, and I were in a class taught by Leslie Cabling, a computer science professor at MIT. The class was called Artificial Intelligence. This was a master's level course. We did a lot of programming. So from my perspective, we've been talking about AI for 20 years. What's different about the AI that we're talking about today? What makes the generative AI different? So I'd like to hear from all of you about your perspectives on that, just to make sure we all know what we're talking about and what makes the AI tools that we're talking about today different from the AI tools that businesses were using in the past. Larry, why don't you get us started?
Thank you, and terrific to be here. Thank you for the invite. So, what's interesting is that what we're seeing today, at least, is really the confluence of several factors that are enabling us to use AI and Gen AI, in very much a production level fashion. Back, even 15 years ago, when I was a banker and I was creating, risk models or decision models, we were still using sample data, right? So number one, because of the massive improvements in sort of technology and cloud enablement, you can not only use massive amounts of data, the whole sets, but also use very different varieties of data and process it at lightning speeds, so that you can actually use it in a way that's affordable and actionable very, very quickly. So the advances in technologies have allowed us to take the very esoteric techniques that we developed 20, 30 years ago in machine learning and actually apply them today to make better, more informed decisions across the board. And so we are seeing adoption rates, the likes of which I haven't seen in 15 years in the business, mainly because it's become a lot more accessible for companies large and small, and the risk guardrails that are being developed tend to be working, and so companies are a lot more confident in being able to use and explain all of these models, obviously use them in very ethical ways. So it's the confluence of all these technical forces that have sort of come together today that allow us to now use very advanced techniques. And obviously, with Gen AI, sort of the floodgates are really opening in terms of the possibilities and the opportunities to affect people's everyday work.
Joselle, anything to add about how AI today is different than maybe how we talked about AI in the past?
I think what I would add to that is and kind of like pulling on the thread, as Larry mentioned, the rate of adoption is probably one of the differentiating factors. And also from, I think, my view, the technology itself and the way that it adapts. So when we think about digital transformation, one, it is not new. One, innovation is not new, especially in technology. Nothing stays the same for that long. So the principles of innovation and transformation is, as you said, Matt, has been here. But I think one of the distinctions is the way in which AI technology itself actually works, and that it is a continuous learning cycle. And so what does that mean for us as business leaders as we start to kind of plan and think about how to what does that mean for our workforce? What does that mean for the way we invest in our products and services? And what does that mean for new value creation? If it is now more accessible, more affordable, how do we think about that from an organizational standpoint? So I think those would be the two distinctions: is fast adoption and the nature of the technology itself.
Elatia, anything to add? Is there something about today's AI that maybe makes it more futuristic than what we've seen before?
Yes, absolutely. So building on what we started with here, it's the distinction of the AI of the past could analyze and predict, took data that we already have and would project forward with it, which is amazing in and of itself. But when we're talking about artificial general intelligence, it has the ability to create. And so when we're talking about unleashing potential in the workplace or for organizations, it's no longer solely a predictive or an analytical tool, but rather a co-creator, a collaborator, an innovation driver in ways that we haven't had access to before. And that, to me, is one of the reasons why it's so exciting.
Great, thank you all. Okay, I think that does a great job setting the stage. So I think we can jump into maybe the core themes I wanted to touch on today. So first, I have a question specifically for Larry, which is that what we just heard about AI today is maybe more about creating, innovating rather than just predicting. What does that look like at McKinsey? How has it affected the kinds of tasks and roles within the organization so far, and what might it look like in the future in your mind?
Well, for us, it's had a significant impact, I would say. The advent of generative AI allowed us to fundamentally rethink the way that we approach our day-to-day work. Very early last year, we started the development of our very own smart agent, which we called Lily. Lily, I believe, was the first female research partner that we had at the firm years ago. So we're honoring her. And what Lily is, it's basically the collection of our immense corpus of knowledge that we've gathered over the decades. Easily accessible by every one of our firm members, and easily interrogatable. So where it could take us in the past a week, 2 weeks to get to a day one answer, now and having to search through dozens of different sort of databases and data stores, today is really at our fingertips. And so it's fundamentally shifting the way we operate. It's fundamentally shifting the way that our teams are deploying, and it's accelerating a number of tasks that would have literally taken us weeks to do, down to minutes or hours or days, so that we can spend a lot more time, doing a lot more value-added, tasks. So we're betting the future, definitely, on Gen AI, and we're continuing to refine the tool, to the point where it can create spreadsheets, it can create, Word documents, PowerPoints. Obviously, we're not looking at it as a way to replace our, knowledge workers, but rather as a way to massively complement, how we do what we do and give us, real access to the vast amount of knowledge that we've developed over the years. It's amazing.
Thank you. So I should just share maybe very quickly, like my perspective as an economist is like what you just said about figuring out ways that technology can complement workers. So I think I have some ways of thinking about that. What kinds of tasks can machines or AI do that could complement the kinds of tasks that workers can do? I think what I find a little bit more challenging is thinking about how these technologies might affect how leaders lead teams or how managers manage teams. So I'm hoping we can talk about that for a few minutes. Joselle, do you want to get us started?
Sure. I think the short answer, Matt, to a very complex question is in terms of how does AI think about the way we what the changes are in leadership is, I think from my viewpoint, AI doesn't change the essence of leadership. What I do believe and have seen is that it amplifies our impact and kind of the human element being, how might we be, with so much data at our fingertips, how might we be more insightful and thoughtful about the information that we're thinking about? And, as you and Elatia and Larry alluded to, this kind of fast-pacedness of an era of disruption and innovation, how might we be courageous in helping our team to learn as well? And I want to share a quick story and share maybe some thinking principles around kind of key questions that I think about as a business leader in the space. So the first thing is, I'm a trained economist. My background is in strategy and finance. Larry, I started out in banking as well, and spent a ton of time in consulting. I wish I had a Lily during my time, but long story short is on the business side of things. And so naturally, when I joined tech, this led me to become a business unit leader for LinkedIn, running a team of about 700 engineers. And so if you've ever looked for a job on LinkedIn or learned something on LinkedIn, that's the team that I was working with, incredible engineers. And so you're probably wondering, like, how is that a natural path? Like, kind of business side of things versus, and then to running an engineering leadership team. So it is not a common path, and I would argue that it should be. And the reason for that is because I think, before I grew up in an age where technology was more so seen as, if you weren't a tech company, the way you think about technology is back end. It's processes that help you do your work versus now one of the differentiators is I think all of us in this panel and participating in this call, technology for us is front and center. We're using it daily. So as leaders, if we think about the fast adoption, and a quick stat on that, many of you probably know this, is, within the first 2 months of ChatGPT being launched, they had 100 million users. And so juxtapose that with a Facebook, who, I think one of the largest user bases in the world, it took them 2.5 years to get to that point. And so if you think about the fast rate of adoption and the idea of continuous learning by virtue of this kind of like large language models that are continuously learning. So how do we lead and manage? And so I think there are kind of 3 core questions that we might need to ask ourselves as leaders. And also, I report to someone as well. So how do we kind of think about this in the context of organizations is one, how might we encourage our teams to have a learning mindset and to create conditions for learning? So if the technology itself is around learning and continuous improvement, how do we encourage that in our workplace and for our teams? I think the second piece is around trust, meaning how might you trust your employees to experiment? I'm a really big fan of that. We did that a lot in product development at LinkedIn and in other spaces and in clients that we've worked with. So how might you encourage experimentation, and how does that change the nature of work? And as you alluded to, Larry, just, like the workload, the type of work. And then I think 3, how do we reimagine investment? And the way I think about and have seen investment in, at least in the technology space, is, how do we think about smarter, faster cycles of investments in new technology and the support systems behind that? And if we subscribe to the fact that, work is changing and we now have new ways of productivity or just kind of new bandwidth, how does that change our performance systems? And how do we as leaders think about that in more real time versus maybe an annual review process or a quarterly review process? So those are kind of the 3 kind of thinking principles, Matt, around leadership that that I think I find insightful.
Elatia, what are your thoughts on how AI might be affecting leadership and management going forward?
Yeah, I think what's really useful is we look at the sort of the history of industrial revolutions, right? And the first and second industrial revolutions, things happen quickly for that time, but compared to today at an incremental pace. Then the digital revolution comes, things begin to occur on that exponential shift. But now in the world that we're living in, it's basically instantaneous or emergent. So how does strategy need to shift as we move through a world or along a spectrum where change happened at a cycle of centuries to seasons to seconds? And so what this invites us to do is, rather than saying, okay, we're going to do a long-term strategic plan that's anchored in the data that we have in the past, lock and load a 5-year trajectory and not look up until we execute that, we need to be able to ask ourselves, what can we do when we don't know where we are, where we don't know where we're going, and we haven't seen the conditions there before? And so for leaders, well, for everybody, and I would argue that in the world that we're living in today, everybody, regardless of position or seniority or rank, is a leader and is being invited into a space of leadership, is anchor into 3 things. It's mindset, it's education, and it's collaboration. And you can use these 3 together as a compass, because that's what you do. When you don't know where you are and you don't know where you're going, if you have a compass that can at least give you your north, then you've got some direction. And mindset from the point of view of, rather than asking, why is this happening to us, or why does the change feel so overwhelming, asking, given that it's here, what do we want to create? From the perspective of education, it is what might we need to learn or unlearn or do or undo in order to develop the skill set that we have or that we will need to thrive. And then finally, collaboration. Gone are the days of competition, zero-sum game. We really need to lean into and on each other to create in this space.
Thank you all. How about we talk about maybe some advice you might be giving to students or younger workers about what should they be investing in today to be able to take advantage of generative AI? What kinds of skills should they be learning? What kinds of concepts and frameworks should they be really trying to make sure they understand so that they're best prepared? I'll just open question to all of you.
Well, I would offer, even before any technology or anything related to that, I think it's a mindset shift. And it's understanding that maybe in the past, so in that incremental world, we could lock and load on a career, begin it in one moment and sort of have the same thing guaranteed more or less through the end. Now is constant, continuous disruption with no foreseeable end. And so anything one can do to expand the capacity for mental resilience is, I would put at the top of the list for helping each and every one of us thrive in this age of great change.
I love that. And maybe just to add more tactically, as we've worked with sort of clients globally and helping them raise the bar on how they apply technology and AI, there's been a number of roles that have emerged, that I think are just fantastic, and they really highlight the kinds of skills that are being valued today across the globe, and this is not just banking. One such role that I think is particularly relevant to, recent grads and folks that have, maybe a technical bent but are not data scientists themselves, is this concept of a translator, which we are seeing pop up everywhere in different names, but the essence of the role is you sort of become the connective tissue between the business and the technology and analytic groups. And so if you take that and you think about, well, what kind of skills do I need to really pick up to be able to perform, kind of at that level and build, a great career that maybe has a business focus, but is well steeped in technology. That's just the sort of role that I think about. And the folks that do it well have a very strong inclination towards the business. So a lot of the traditional classes and a lot of the traditional work that you would have thought about as a strategist, as a marketing executive, in human resources, in operations, they all remain. But then you augment that with a fair dosage of understanding the basics of modeling, of technology, of data pipelines, of ecosystems. It doesn't mean that you have to be a PhD level data scientist to know how to prompt engineer. I built a GPT model over the weekend in like 17 minutes. It doesn't require that much technical knowledge. It requires curiosity. And it requires an ability to understand how the two connect. And if you can work in that space where you're kind of at the intersection of, how to improve business, whatever that business process or whatever that business function is, and really understand some of the foundational elements that enable that, I think that's fantastic. And I would encourage all students, to balance both.
I really love that, Larry. I think the idea of like a multilingual leader with the perspective on business and kind of finance and what drives investment and kind of the product development cycle. And kind of my view from experience is that the closer, so if we think about, Elatia, you mentioned the rate of innovation is, I think you used the word instantaneous. So if that were true, and it is indeed true, then the cycle time from kind of understanding the technology to how does that fit into your roadmap, be it a product or a service, and then how quickly can you get that out to the marketplace to create value. I think that's a framework that I would kind of encourage folks, especially kind of new grads, to think about is and when you think about your kind of skill sets, one, the closer understanding that you can get across each of those dimensions. As Larry mentioned, you don't have to be, like, if you want to go into marketing, you don't have to be, an expert in other areas or an engineer, like an expert in kind of business strategy. But the closer that you get to foundations across each of those areas, and the closer that you can close the gap between, how does a technology become a product, become a valuable kind of company and business, I think the better off that you'll be in terms of learning, leading, and ascending.
Larry, I want to ask you for some follow-up on what I guess is your hobby coding. Just for people that are trying to get started. I mean, what kind of advice would you give to them? You said you just made your own little, I don't know if it was a chatbot or something else. Like,
no,
can you try to demystify it a little bit? Like, what would be your advice on the entry point there?
Curiosity. I mean, to me, I was afraid of this new technology until I got under the covers. I went to OpenAI, I think it's called GPT editor, right? And using plain English, you can describe, in my case, just for you geeks out there, in my case, I wanted to be able to upload a bunch of 10Ks into the engine. Sorry, guys, you asked the question, so I'm giving you an answer. And I wanted to be able to interrogate, what is Walmart's plan for net zero investments over the next 5 years? I have no idea where I'm going to find that in the MD&A section of a 10K. So I built this engine where I described what I wanted to do in plain English, and then I worked with the interface to kind of fine tune it to the types of answers that I was looking for. So if you expand that a little bit to the work environment, I could be an actuary, I could be a marketing analyst, I could be an HR executive. And if my company allows me access to, Microsoft GPT Copilot or OpenAI GPT editor, I could find ways to make my day a lot less tedious just by using the tools that are available that no longer require for me to know how to code in Python, or how to fine tune a large language model, and just using plain English. And I think that's fantastic. And literally was like less than 20 minutes from beginning to end.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for that specific example. I appreciate it.
Matt, if I can just add one
Yeah.
there, I love that story. My entry point was actually a person. I had our heating and AC system broke down right before winter. And so normally, kind of go on Google or Yelp to find something. And but very quickly, one, information was disparate, and two, ChatGPT had just come out at that time. So it was essentially kind of, it was an analysis for, how do I think about HVAC, a very personal kind of home thing, to very quickly, once I got contracts from folks, feeding that into the engine and asking it, how do I analyze these contracts? What is the difference? And so I think that thread, and I love what you shared, Larry. And I think when I think about my own personal experience, what I would share is that just as the idea for go for it. One, there are many free services, even for OpenAI. There's a free service, and then there's a premium paid service. And Bing is still free. I think Bard, there's a free option. So long story short is, this is accessible to anybody kind of here. And what I love is, my cousins in the Philippines that are living, some of them are, live in the provinces and kind of mountainous farmland, have the same access as long as you have Wi-Fi. So one, the services are free, and two, there are many great certifications and then perhaps, and they're free certifications that you could take that are foundational courses on how to use artificial intelligence and large language models. If that's useful, I can connect into Booth. Maybe we can share some of those certifications with you. And the great thing is you can post them and share them on LinkedIn or with your network. And I think that is I guess the last thing that I would share around kind of this learning, and that's it's accessible and it's free, is that for us leaders, when we think about like modeling learning environments and modeling kind of trust and being vulnerable, like I think the biggest story is we're all living this at the exact same time. We are all experimenting, and no one needs to be left behind on that. So, but I think as leaders, we should share our learning journey and the stories around how we first started using it and what we're doing to continuously learn.
Thank you. Let me ask one more kind of big picture question before I want to save lots of time to open up for the Q&A. So the economist John Maynard Keynes about 100 years ago made a prediction that 100 years later we'd all be working 15 hours a week. That didn't happen. He was right about many things, but he was wrong about that. Maybe now with generative AI, it's going to be different. Maybe a more broad way of asking a question is, how do you think that generative AI is going to affect how we work, our relationship to work? And then if I can ask you for a specific quantitative prediction, our amount of work. So just open it up to all of you.
Well, I think there's first, as we think about work and we think about the next 5, 10, 15 years and what that looks like, there's an important distinction between what we call the future of work and the future of working, right? So the future of working is what's talked about a lot in the popular press that is named future of work, but it's essentially how is this thing that we call job enabled by this thing that we call technology across the board? So what does that look like, and how might we become better at the things that we do, and what are the new jobs that we'll have to do that? But the future of work itself is actually a much broader philosophical question, that really gets to the underpinnings of like, what is the economy? What is our definition of value? How will we as a society hold this space and thing called work? And how might our definition of the economy itself begin to shift? And I think right at the center of that is artificial intelligence generally, but especially artificial general intelligence. And talking about specifics, like the IMF at the beginning of the year this year put out some research that says that 40% of all jobs globally are susceptible to or exposed to AI. Now, that's varying degrees of going to be complemented by, going to be eliminated by, or going to be shifted dramatically by. And that number changes, right? If you are in a developing economy, or if you're in an advanced economy, in advanced economies, we're looking at 60% of jobs being open to that kind of a shift. And so rather than, and although it's important and interesting to look at what's going to happen to my job specifically, I think the much more interesting question is, knowing that it's here, knowing that at some point we're going to be impacted, how might I want to shift my strategy around my thinking and my leadership in order to use this to my advantage?
So maybe I'll give you a few examples, because there's been a few aha moments in the last few months that have really delighted me. I've been happily married 27 years. I've got 3 kids and 4 dogs at home. So like, I really treasure my personal time, and I fully recognize that oftentimes I work with a bunch of maniacs that just like to, it's, nobody tells us to work long hours. Nobody tells us to work hard. We just do, because that's how we're wired. And I see that in corporate America, and I see that across the globe as well. So this is not just, an us thing. But one of the great things that have recently happened is this trend towards thinking about work-life balance as part of the equation for the efficiency gains that are being generated through generative AI. So yes, I agree with the statistics, the 40%, the 60%. I think they're fingers and toes, not whole humans, in that you can take aspects of somebody's job and you can massively optimize it, but you are not doing the full job. And so when we think about efficiency gains, and what we've done with a lot of our clients, when you begin to quantify for a specific function, you could free up, let's call it 100,000 hours a year of work. Like, what does that actually mean? You would imagine that the initial instinct would be to just quantify that in terms of headcount and say, great, I can lop off, 30% of the head, and be done with it. But what we're seeing is that quantity of efficiency gain is now being translated into an investable asset. How do we now take that 100,000 hours and invest it in more productive work? But then how do we balance that in giving people and workers some of that time back? And so, most of our clients are trying to figure out, what's a reasonable balance? Do we go for a shorter, work week? Do we invest it in product development? Do we invest it in growth? It now becomes an investable asset that each company has a decision to make in terms of how they utilize it. In my own personal view, I would love it if, our work days became a little bit shorter, working a little bit smarter, and just, leaving more time for personal endeavors that'll enrich our lives and give us the energy then we then need, to get up Monday morning and go to work again.
All right, let me pull some of the questions from the Q&A to just take some time. I'm going to take some time on that, and then I'll ask all of you for your closing thoughts. So one of the questions asks about the acronym AGI, which I understand to be Artificial General Intelligence. And maybe a way of phrasing the question is do any of you see that it's possible that with AGI, the technological changes will be so fast that they'll outpace the ability of businesses, or maybe even all of us, to adapt?
Short answer, yes.
Okay, I'll accept the short answer, but help us understand that.
But I won't leave you hanging out there with it. No deer in the headlights here. This is where I think the most exciting conversation when you think about future and leading from the future sits, is what happens in the world where we're not even solely contemplating artificial general intelligence or smarter, faster processing capabilities, but rather scenarios where we're looking at super intelligence, super consciousness, super sapience. How might we need to shift? And there's a really interesting concept that was written about for the very first time back in like 1965 or the early 1970s, called future shock. And it's the challenge that we as human beings have. It's this uncomfortable feeling when we move too quickly and we don't know what's going on, is sort of all of this that we're experiencing right now. And so our brains can't even process consciously in our day-to-day the amount of information that we're taking in. So now as that increases, the challenge becomes even greater. And so what we want to do first and foremost is not see AGI or artificial intelligence as a they, them, or as an opposite, but rather as an enabler or a partner. So how might we work with that technology in order to be able to understand the size, scale, and scope of the change that's happening? But then secondly, how might we do what I call moving business beyond the brain and begin to lead not just with our intellect, but with our entire being? And in order to be able to process the quantity of information that's coming at us. So short answer, yes, AGI will be present in here for us. And the game becomes, rather than feeling overwhelmed by it, how might we partner with it in order to lead better?
Another question about maybe moving us back to the younger workers and students is how do you think about the career opportunities of people with, like, say, business and liberal arts backgrounds versus computer science and technical backgrounds? Do you see any changes in the relative demand for those different types of backgrounds going forward in the age of generative AI?
I am jealous at the new classes graduating now and the vast opportunities that they're going to have. I'll let you in on a little secret. When we were trying to kind of raise the bar on our understanding and ability to really work with the new type of models and modeling techniques that came from generative AI, how to fine-tune an LLM, how to do prompt engineering. One of the findings was that, English lit majors were far better at this than like traditional data scientists, because it's a very different way of thinking and it's a very different way of working. So I'm personally like super inspired by the aperture of opportunities that are going to be coming. I'm not going, when I sit down with my kids, is with excitement about what's coming in the future, not with trepidation that machines are going to take over, your jobs. Everything that we do with AI is going to have to be done responsibly. Are there bad actors? Absolutely, there are bad actors. But when you think about, what the responsible sort of companies and governments and entities are going to be working with, so long as they continue to do it in an ethical and in a responsible way, I think it's only going to enrich the types of opportunities that are going to be out there for graduating classes. It's a great time to be alive.
Okay, taking the perspective of small business owner of a mid-sized company that is not in AI and is maybe AI curious. what's your advice to them about what they should be doing? Should they be hiring consultants? Should they be hiring engineers? What's kind of your practical advice for the next several years about what they should be doing?
So I have a couple of clients that I advise who are in that middle space, quickly growing, but in that middle space. And the name of the game can be hackathon. And hackathon being every single person in the company spend a week or 3 days or half a day or whatever it is that you decide for the time, and say, okay, what do we do for our individual roles and for the company? How might we use AI to put ourselves out of business? And then how might we use AI to 100x our business within a Y period of time? And see what you come up with. This will, of course, it ignites folks' curiosity. It begins to help you evaluate what risks might be present for your business because of the advent of AI. And it removes the fear around, should I use the tool or should I not use the tool or set of tools? And then all of a sudden, you've got a whole bunch of innovative, interesting, perhaps product to market or new solutions that you can begin to develop in a very short amount of time.
I'd like to answer that question with a kind of tactical lens of building a business. I think that if the question were, do I need to hire engineers right away because AI seems to be front and center? The short answer is no. And as a person who has the business that I'm building as well, like there are different ways that you can leverage artificial intelligence. So for instance, many of you probably know Calendly. So that has AI built in instead of hiring, an EA or an assistant. That could be, different ways. So I think that the highest level framework is that there are AI products for different areas of the business. So as a small business owner, when you're thinking about investments, one, core questions are, what business are you in? So, and so for instance, if you're 0 to 10, maybe doing I'm advising someone right now that's doing a lot of design, kind of a content strategy type of work, where their tech stack looks like, from meeting, Calendly, like meeting type stuff, to using Canva, like generating images, and they need a content management system as well. But for others who are maybe 1 to 3 folks, they're more like what I would call like knowledge creators or like kind of coaches. Your tech stack doesn't need to be that complicated, and you don't have to hire an engineer, yet there are opportunities where you can optimize your world of work.
Okay, we just got a question that I quite like, which is, what do you think are some of the most overhyped applications of generative AI today?
Gosh, overhyped. I have no idea what the hype cycle is on some of it. But I will say, that. So I'll answer the question differently. I will answer the question by sort of pointing out where we're actually seeing, like super positive momentum. So maybe so in banking, which is where I live most of the time, I mean, there's like hundreds of different use cases that are being experimented on. But if you take a step back and you think about where are we seeing like real momentum, and by that I mean real examples where companies are taking solutions into production and actually generating, value and sort of changing. I would say that there's maybe only 3 or 4. Number one is code acceleration, right? So being able to massively accelerate the way that you develop new software, right? So you can use copilots to help you create new software, or to translate old code into new code. Let's say you're sitting on an old, mainframe computer that was initially done on, on COBOL or something, finding ways of actually modernizing that. We're seeing a ton of momentum in just sort of real back office automation and sort of operating efficiencies in that spectrum. The second one are these sort of virtual advisors or virtual assistants like the Lilies, being able to gather a ton of knowledge and allowing either customers or knowledge workers to interrogate it. You can think of legal and compliance, you can think of marketing, you can think of front, like customer facing roles. There's a lot of applications there. The third one I would say is just in good old service ops, being able to create co-pilots that sit side by side customer service agents that allow them to better understand customer intent based on their conversations, based on the context, and that's getting a lot of momentum. And then finally, to the very early definition of generative AI, generating content. You would be amazed to see how many legal teams are creating first drafts of briefs with Gen AI. How many risk teams are creating model documentation with generative AI, where you put the model code into the tool and out comes kind of the first draft of your risk model document. In all of this, I would say that until somebody proves me wrong otherwise, you still need the human in the loop. Like, I don't see any of these are being either client ready or regulatory body ready. All of these are first drafts that will eventually require, the human element to kind of finalize them. So I think those are the four major areas where we're seeing like real momentum. There's a lot of talk about, personalized messages. There's a lot of talk about a slew of other areas, but quite honestly, I don't think most companies have developed the guardrails in place to limit toxic, language, limit hallucinations to the point where they would be willing to engage with customers, on a real-time basis, at least in the banking space, which is so highly regulated.
Okay, I'm getting quite a few questions that I'll just group into the following bucket, which is what are the ways or concerns that you see in the future about privacy, intellectual property, in terms of how AI can interact or be protected by those things? Maybe to try to rephrase it, it's like, should we be concerned that AI raises new privacy risks or makes it difficult for people to enforce copyright or protect their intellectual property in a way that might make businesses careful? I guess, Larry, you talked about regulated industries, but I think these concerns would apply to unregulated industries as well.
I mean, it is one of the biggest, risks and questions that we routinely get. If you are an institution that has already been using machine learning and AI, which is not brand new, you would have already encountered some of these risks. And by the way, I would include sort of privacy and cyber. And I mean, there's a slew of sort of types of risks. When it comes to Gen AI, and I think this is why companies are moving at a much slower pace than I would have expected, right? I mean, I think what you're seeing in the marketplace versus what's being experimented or what the ability, what the capabilities are very, very different. And I think most institutions are not yet totally comfortable until the regulatory bodies come and sort of publish their guardrails of how far they're going to take this when you're talking about outward facing solutions. When you're talking about a solution like Lily that is essentially taking our own documents, and by the way, those documents stay inside our corpus. They're never used to train any LLM outside of our walls. When all I'm doing is taking my documents or my company data or my customer data, and not sharing it, but rather using it as a way to optimize internal processes, I think that's a little different than actually utilizing it as a means of sort of generating new business value outside the firm. So I do think that there's a subset of opportunities and use cases that are kind of flying below that threshold radar that a lot of companies are working with. And I think over the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to see how high we can kind of raise the bar to begin to interact more, intimately with customers, and then how to protect, to make sure that we're not divulging private information, that we're not utilizing any sort of bias in the models that might be embedded in the models without, us knowing, and that's going to happen over time.
Okay, great. I want to leave time for all of you to give your closing thoughts. And before I do that, I just want to mention there's a number of other questions asking for links and materials, and we will distribute that afterwards. You'll get an email with a feedback survey, and we'll include hopefully a lot of answers to those requests there. But okay, so now I want to hear from the three of you your closing thoughts. This comes from Emily. She says she always likes to have this ending these kind of panels, which is what you think students should be focusing on. They're going to go out into the world, and that world's going to have generative AI. What do you think they should be paying attention to and focusing on? Yeah, Elatia, why don't you get us started?
Sure. So first and foremost, understanding that now and all of the nows that will come later is the most important time and most powerful time that we'll ever have, because it's the moment in which it's the manifestation of everything that's come before, and it's the moment in which we are creating what the future is going to be. And so now is the time to get into action. And now is the moment that your leadership is needed. And so I would just encourage everybody to step into that role by asking themselves, what do I want to create? What kind of impact do I want to have? And how do I want to use my life?
Thank you. Joselle?
More like words of advice. Number one, go for it. Speed is important in innovation. And number two, look, you don't have to know everything, and you can learn anything.
Great, thanks. Larry?
Listen, there's never been a better time to be graduating than today, I think, and particularly if you're graduating out of the U of C, where you are already, instinctively, probably more quantitatively, inclined, than your typical graduating student. So having said that, it's exciting and be positive because there's an amazing array of opportunities that are coming your way. Number one. Number two, don't be afraid. If you are tepid about this new technology, you don't know how it works. Listen, if this old dog was able to generate a new engine in 20 minutes, and believe me, I still print my calendars, on paper. So I'm not the most sophisticated user of technology. If I could do it, believe me that you'll be able to do it way, way, way better. Just lean in, embrace it and lean in and learn as much about it as you can, side of desk or through classes. It will help you in interviews. It'll help you in sort of doing your job. And it will open up other opportunities that maybe you didn't think existed. So it's exciting, and I'm very excited for all of you.
All right, we reached the top of the hour. Thank you all. Thanks to our alumni for spending time with us. I found this incredibly informative and inspiring. So thank you again, and thanks to all the participants for listening to us and for giving us all the questions.